Let's talk about India's forests. They're an absolutely vital part of the country's landscape. But something really alarming has been happening over the last decade. A shocking amount of tree cover has just vanished. And at the center of it all, a single, very controversial new law. So, what is going on with India's forests? And could a law that's supposed to manage them actually be making things a whole lot worse? Okay, first up, India's post-2013 forest crisis. Let's really dig into this decade of decline. So what really happened after 2013? Well, the data tells a very clear and honestly a very alarming story. This wasn't some slow, gradual decline. No, this was a sudden and pretty dramatic speed up in forest loss. Get ready for this number because it really puts the whole thing in perspective. According to Global Forest Watch, a staggering 95% of the tree cover India lost in its natural forests was lost in just one decade, from 2013 to 2023. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Nearly all the loss from the past 2 decades happened in just the most recent one. And that loss wasn't a steady trickle either. It came in these sharp, devastating spikes. While 2016 and 2023 were really bad years, the crisis hit its absolute peak in 2017. That year, nearly 190,000 hectares were lost. To give you an idea of scale, that's an area larger than the entire city of Delhi, gone, in just 12 months. So this leads to the million-dollar question, right? What is driving all this deforestation? Well, it turns out it's a combination of some pretty powerful forces, which brings us to our next section. Geographically, the problem is incredibly concentrated. A full 60% of India's tree cover loss is happening in just 5 states, all in the country's ecologically fragile northeast. And this isn't just any old region. We're talking about a global biodiversity hotspot, which makes every single hectare lost that much more damaging. So what are the culprits, both in the northeast and across the rest of the country? It's really a mix of factors. You've got a huge surge in large-scale infrastructure projects. Think highways, industrial corridors. Forest land is also being officially diverted for things like mining and agriculture. And then there's this shift towards monoculture plantations, which, yeah, might technically increase tree cover, but they absolutely crush biodiversity. All of this is made worse by what many critics call weak forest governance. And to put a really fine point on it, we're not just talking about illegal logging here. This is the official process. In just 1 year, 2023 to 2024, a record-breaking 29,000 hectares of forest land were formally diverted for other uses. That's a 45% jump over the highest level seen in the entire previous decade. The pace is, without a doubt, picking up. Now, this growing crisis prompted a major policy overhaul from the Indian government. And this brings us right to the heart of the debate: a new forest rulebook. And here it is, the Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023. It was enacted in December, and its stated goal is to update the old rules from 1980 to try and better balance modern development needs with environmental goals. But the question that everyone is asking is, does it actually strike the right balance? So what actually changed? Well, the new amendment brings in much broader exemptions for certain development projects. It allows state governments to assign forest land to private companies for things like ecotourism. And critically, it delegates more approval power away from the central government and directly to the states, basically to speed the whole process up. But out of all the changes, this is maybe the single most debated one. The new law completely exempts so-called strategic projects from needing any forest clearance as long as they're within 100 kilometers of an international border. That zone covers huge parts of the Himalayas and the Northeast. You know, the very biodiversity hotspots we were just talking about. As you can imagine, these massive changes have not gone unnoticed. Not at all. The new act immediately sparked a fierce national debate, pitting the goals of development squarely against the principles of conservation. This slide really captures the two sides of the coin here. On one side, the government argues that these changes are vital for national security, to make development easier, and to help boost tree planting efforts. On the other side, though, environmentalists are deeply worried. They say it weakens protections, puts biodiversity at extreme risk, and cuts out critical expert oversight from the whole decision-making process. And this quote right here, it perfectly sums up the core fear of the critics. The argument is that these exemptions are just way too broad. They create loopholes that could lead to irreversible damage in India's most precious and vulnerable ecosystems. So if we dive a little deeper into those concerns, critics point to these specific risks. First, the law narrows the legal definition of what even counts as a forest, which could potentially leave huge areas of land unprotected. It could push aside forest-dwelling communities who have traditionally protected these areas for generations. It also allows for more human activity through ecotourism. And, of course, the big one, it could massively speed up deforestation in those incredibly sensitive border states. So, where does this leave India's forests? The new rulebook has been written, but trust me, this story is far from over. The future is now actually being decided in the nation's highest court. And that's right, this isn't a done deal. The amendments were immediately challenged in India's Supreme Court, and the court has stepped in. It issued orders that have essentially pressed pause on the whole thing, restricting any forest diversion under the new rules while the case gets a full review. The legal battle for India's forests is happening as we speak. Ultimately, this entire complex debate boils down to one fundamental question. After a decade of truly unprecedented deforestation, can India find a way for economic progress and forest preservation to actually coexist? The answer to that question will define the future of the nation's last wild spaces for generations to come.